Welcome, everyone. I call the March 16th, 2022 Planning Commission meeting to order. The main purposes of tonight's meeting are a study session on middle housing and hobby beekeeping code amendments. Before we move on to agenda items, I'd like to acknowledge our remote meeting format. As with our previous meetings, the commissioners and staff will be participating via Zoom. During this Zoom meeting, the chat and question functions are not available to use to ensure compliance with the Open Public Meetings Act. We have a public comment agenda item at the beginning of the meeting. This time is for comments on issues not on tonight's agenda. Please limit these comments to 3 minutes. Under Governor Inslee's Proclamation 20-28 regarding open public meetings, this meeting will be held remotely. Public comment will be allowed both in writing and orally. The Imagine Bothell notice, city website, and tonight's agenda all provided information to the public for providing comments. People wishing to comment were instructed to notify staff or provide written comments by 3 p.m. today. The video of this meeting will be streamed live as well as recorded and available for later viewing on the city's YouTube channel. A call-in number was provided on the meeting agenda for members of the public who wish to call in by phone to listen live to the meeting. For our phone-in callers, during staff presentations, staff will make every effort to specify which materials they are referencing so that everyone can follow along. Those who provided advance notice are able to make comments under the audience comment section of the meeting. Email was encouraged as well and will be acknowledged. At this point, we'll take a moment to acknowledge the attendance of the commissioners, and I will go based on position number. Commissioner Dodd?
Present.
Commissioner Westerbeck? Yep, there he is, muted. Commissioner Curd?
Here.
Commissioner Robeson?
Here.
New commissioner tonight, Commissioner Anders.
Here.
Welcome to your first meeting. And Commissioner Gustafson.
Here. Oh, question. Is it Commissioner Alders or Commissioner Anders? Sorry, I didn't hear.
Commissioner Anders, correct?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay.
Nice to meet you online.
Yes, again, welcome. Commissioner Anders will be transitioning to the video later in the meeting as conditions permit. So we'll look forward to seeing her as well as hearing from her shortly. So in addition, Community Development Director Michael Cotterman, Senior Planner Dave Boyd, Christian Allworth, Code Compliance Officer, Sarah Breckstone, and Sierra Carlson with OTEC are also in attendance. Lastly, before we begin, I'd like to reiterate some meeting guidelines. For all attendees, please speak clearly and pause frequently. State your name each time before speaking. Mute your microphone when not speaking. If you are also streaming the live video feed, please turn the sound off as there is a delay. At specific breaks in the presentation, I will be calling on members who wish to speak or ask a question. If you want to speak, please indicate this by holding up the speaker card or using the raise hand function, and I will call on you as I see you. This will help avoid the problem of having two people speaking at the same time. Identify yourself before you ask a question, make a motion, second a motion, or participate in debate. And please mute your microphone when not speaking and unmute when you are speaking. So at the top of the agenda, the first item is public comment. Keeping with Governor Inslee's Emergency Proclamation 20-28 regarding public comments and open public gatherings and open public meetings, the city has accepted visitor comment in writing as well as accepted sign-up sheets for those who wish to speak at tonight's meeting. Written comments submitted to staff no later than 3 p.m. today were forwarded to all commissioners, and we have not received any, and are part of the record. This time is for items not on the agenda. Director Cotterman, please let us know if there are any comments received.
We have not received any comments today, Mr. Chair.
Okay, and there's no one in the waiting room looking to speak?
No, there is no one else in the waiting room.
All right. Well, with that, then we will move on to our next agenda item, the approval of minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes? Commissioner Curd.
I move to approve the meeting minutes.
Is there a second? Commissioner Dodd.
Second.
Okay, it is moved and seconded to approve the minutes of the March 2nd meeting. Is there any discussion around these minutes? I actually have something. I'm looking over find it. There was an indication of interviews for boards and commissions held on March 15th. The minutes say they were actually held on March 8th.
We'll correct that.
Okay. And that's all that I've got. Any other comments on, because they didn't happen yesterday. Any other comments on the minutes? All right, being none, all in favor of adopting the minutes, please signify so. And new Commissioner Anders, well, I guess you weren't there, so we have, okay. Well, we have unanimous approval of the minutes. So with that, we will move on to our new business. And to start with new business, I'd like to start with our new commissioner, Commissioner Anders. First of all, welcome to the commission. We're pleased to have you join us and wonder if you could tell us a few words about yourself, what brought you here, and any interests you'd like to share with us.
Thank you. I am a Bothell resident since 1990. I have two boys in the Bothell, in the North Shore School District, one at Bothell High, one at Canyon Park Middle School. And my husband and I both live in, well, we're working from home now, so we spend a lot of time in Bothell. I've been a lawyer in Washington State for 25 years, and I practice in private practice. I work for Kaiser right now, so I've worked in private practice for a couple of decades, and now I'm in-house at Kaiser. Do a variety of litigation, but mostly I just love living in Bothell and want to help in any way that I can.
Well, welcome to the commission. We're pleased to have you with us. I had three
Thank
sons go through Canyon Park and Bothell High. So fun times, mostly.
Yeah. I feel like I have 6.
Yeah, I fully sympathize. Dr. Cotterman, do we have any other new business?
No other new business, Mr. Chair. I don't know if you wanted to maybe have each of the commissioners say a little bit about themselves for the benefit of Commissioner Anders.
Sure. Thanks for that prompting. It is, in person, we'd be chatting with each other, and perhaps sometime soon we will. So I guess I'll say, so first, I'm chair. I've been chair for the past 2 years, been on the commission for 4 years. I've been in Bothell. I've been in my house since '86 and in Bothell since '92. I didn't move, the city did. As I said, I've had 3 sons, my wife and I, raised in Bothell. My career was with King County, environmental engineer, later became a bureaucrat and a manager. And I'm enjoying my time on the commission tremendously. So let's stick with going by position number. That would be Commissioner Dodd.
Thanks, Chair. Hi, Tony. My name is Amanda Dodd. I grew up in Bothell. Fun fact, I actually went to Canyon Park and Bothell High School. I agree with fun times mostly. I think that's a good summary. And I now have a 6-year-old who goes to Shelton View and is slated to go to the same 2 schools after that. I've been on the commission for 2 years. It's been really fun. I'm kind of looking forward to seeing everybody in person at some point, because I had one in-person meeting before the pandemic really struck and took hold. So yeah, thanks.
All right, Commissioner Westerbeck.
Hi, Tony. Excuse me. Welcome. I'm Kerry Westerbeck. I'm newer to the Planning Commission. I've been on just over a year. I'm a local architect and I live in the downtown area of Bothell. Been here in Bothell this time because I've lived in Bothell 3 times in my life for the last 7 years now. Was in Kenmore previously, grew up in Woodinville, went to North Shore schools, and now I've got 2 daughters, 18 and 11. They both go to North Shore schools, same middle school and high school I went to, North Shore Middle and Inglemoor. I also have built a small building downtown, so I've done some small development. And so that's what brought me to the Planning Commission, just being involved in the building and architecture industry. Thought I could be useful here. So welcome, glad you're here.
Thank you.
Unmute. Commissioner Curd.
That's me. So, hey, and welcome. My name is Karsten Curd. I have been on the commission for 3 years, so I have seen people in real life before, before the pandemic. I live in the Maywood Hills area. I didn't go to school in Bothell. I didn't grow up here, but I live in the Maywood Hills area in one of the old historic fourplex houses. And I just love Bothell so much. I love living close to downtown and having all the services and just seeing the city change over time since I've been here. In my professional life, I'm a licensed geologist. And so I spend a lot of time looking at landslides, erosion, drainage, that sort of thing, which Bothell has those problems, just like everywhere else. And so critical areas are my expertise, but I also have a passion for affordable housing and looking at making sure that our city is affordable. Thanks, and welcome again.
Thanks, Commissioner Curd. Commissioner Robson.
So Commissioner Robson, if you'll hold 1 second, Commissioner Anders is now here virtually and we can panel her in. So Commissioner Anders, if you could turn on your video and just to make sure everything's working. Because we have yet to have a commission meeting without some technical difficulties. So okay, thank you. Commissioner Robson, go ahead.
Thank you, Director. Yeah, my name is Claire Robson. I came on to the Planning Commission alongside Commissioner Westerbeck, and I live downtown. I've been here 1 year along with Commissioner Westerbeck. I live very close to downtown, near the college, and I came to the commission because 2 of my neighbors have become homeless over the past few years. And are currently living out of their car. I see them at the library all the time. So, it's a very, very concerned about finding that middle housing and making sure we got a good situation for everybody, that everybody can be included. So looking forward to getting to know you.
All right. And last by position number, Commissioner Gustafson.
Hi, Tony. Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah. I live in the Brickyard, Norway Hill neighborhood. I have 3 little boys, and they're not in elementary school yet. And let's see, professionally, I am a tax accountant. My favorite part of the job is doing IRS filings for nonprofits. And I got interested in planning through volunteering with nonprofits and realizing that the people who work for them often cannot live in the areas that they serve. And let's see, I've been on the Planning Commission for 2 years, and my favorite location in Bothell is the library. So that's about it. Nice to meet you.
Well, again, welcome, Commissioner Anders. We are very pleased to have you here. Look forward to working with you on a variety of issues. And we won't quiz you on the bylaws or anything this meeting, but I doubt very many of us would pass that quiz either. So with that, Director Cotterman, any other new business?
Mr. Chair, we do have one person now in the attendee room. I don't know if they had intended to speak. If you like, I can check.
Certainly, please do.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, hi. So I'm Matt Carter. I live up on Maywood Hill, apparently just above the lower half that seems to be kind of forgotten between the 190 and the Catholic Church. Hoping to go and hear about the possible rezonings that are going on because I'm kind of annoyed at the fact that I can't really do much with my lot, and I've got a tiny, tiny little house that sits on it.
So did you want to speak when we get to the middle housing item, Mr. Carter?
Yeah, if I could.
Okay, I'll bring you in at that time. Thank you.
All right. And if there are no other new business items or citizens, we'll move right into the middle housing item. So I believe Senior Planner Boyd will lead us on this one.
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Chair Kernan and commissioners. I'll be joined also in this presentation by Sarah Breakstone and Sierra Carson of OTAC. And I'm going to jump right into that. So again, this is a continued study session on middle housing code amendments. We last met on this on February 16th, so 1 month ago today. The purpose of these code amendments, the purpose of tonight's meeting is to continue that discussion of potential code amendments to enable a range of middle housing options. And it started with when Planning Commission made its recommendation to council on allowing corner lot duplexes in single family zones. They also recommended going beyond that and considering other middle housing options. And the initial discussion was around allowing up to 4 plexes in new subdivisions in single family zones. And we are, as we've got into it, we are also looking at other options, potentially including cottages, courtyard apartments, and also expanding ADUs or at least revising the code, the regulations for ADUs to further remove barriers to creating those. And this is all being supported by funding from the Washington State Department of Commerce. They funded the earlier work on corner lot duplexes, and that's when we hired OTAC to help us with that, and we've been able to get another grant from Commerce. We're actually currently using the remainder of that former grant, but we've got another grant to help us work on these more ambitious middle housing amendments. And then in this slide, also I just point out these are a couple middle housing examples in my neighborhood of Ballard. One is a 4-plex and one is a duplex, a side-by-side duplex. The 4-plex is 2 over 2, so just some examples of different types of middle housing that do exist especially in older established neighborhoods throughout the country, including Bothell. The 2 images here are from Lower Maywood. And that's one reason why I am referring to them as just middle housing. They're also commonly referred to as missing middle because current, more recent single family zoning does not allow them. Just by way of background, these amendments are supported by our housing strategy and particularly the priorities for flexibility for innovative housing types, for including affordable housing requirements with capacity increases, and for providing affordable housing for families. Some of this is a repeat, but I do want to keep anybody who's new to the discussion, get them up to speed. So I may go through some of the repeat material fairly quickly. Further background, we started this with this study session on November 3rd. Since then, we held a middle housing walking tour in Lower Maywood with the support of Bothelites for People-Oriented Places. Their work also led to a KUOW story that highlighted the middle housing in Lower Maywood. We got feedback from council as part of the docket discussion in February 15th. As of last week, the middle housing and ADU legislation that we discussed previously is not advancing in this session, but we do anticipate that it may come back in the next session. And in any case, we do also believe that there's support for many of the measures that were being considered by council. So we will be continuing to use some of those provisions as guidance as we move forward. We've done additional research since February 16th on middle housing efforts elsewhere. Those are included in attachment 1, which is an updated version of that research memo from OTAC, and they'll be presenting on that shortly. And this is one of the items from the research showing the spike in ADU production in Seattle since they removed significant restrictions to ADUs in late 2019. And so the production spiked in 2020. And what you see for 2021 is just through the second quarter of that year. So it was headed for an even higher number in 2021 when this chart was made. I participated on behalf of the city in a State of Housing in Bothell webinar on February 17th that was organized by Bothelites for People-Oriented Places in Bothell, BOPOP, and the Housing Development Consortium. And that was to talk not just about middle housing, but all of the efforts that the city has made on affordable housing, starting with, before my time here, Bothell's pioneering work on preserving mobile home parks, mobile and manufactured home parks, and going through our recent efforts to create the first inclusionary zoning in Bothell, multifamily tax exemptions, and now tackling middle housing, or taking another step to address middle housing after passing the corner lot duplexes and previous efforts on ADUs. I don't know if that presentation directly led to this, but the Housing Development Consortium recently recognized the city of Bothell for the efforts that have been made in recent years to address affordable housing. And I'd just like to give significant credit on that to the Planning Commission and Council that have really taken affordable housing on and made that a priority in recent years. So what is middle housing? And this is repeat, but I will go through this fairly quickly. Essentially, it's house scale buildings with multiple units in walkable neighborhoods, and it fills a need for housing in between single family homes and larger apartments. It could form a transitional zone, as shown in this diagram and the previous one on the previous page as well. But it can also be scattered through a single family area, as was often the case in traditional residential neighborhoods. I'm going to go really quickly through these. These are just examples from the term missing middle housing was coined by Opticos, who developed that diagram on the previous slide. And they have a great website that describes a whole bunch of types of middle housing. So I'm going to go through these fairly quickly and point out a couple things that I haven't pointed out too much in the past. You'll see that many of these have the housing units toward the front of the lot and another structure towards the back, which often is a garage. The two different each diagram shows an alley loaded option as well as an option without an alley, so that the car access is from the street. And I just want to point that out because we're going to be talking about somewhat about the potential for some requirements to ensure that these units are street facing, and that back unit could be a separate housing unit. Only one of the examples here shows it as having housing above the garage, but it could be in many different types of examples. So so stacked duplexes have the advantage of the lower unit could be an accessible unit. Stacked fourplexes, the same, that the two lower units could be accessible units. Cottage courts also lend themselves towards accessibility. And here's one where the building in the back of the site does have units above garage structure. Courtyard apartments is a type that we haven't discussed a lot, but it's one that I do want to bring up in the discussion tonight specifically. These are stacked triplexes. In Boston, they're known as triple deckers, which again are house scale, certainly on the scale of many of the larger homes that are being built today, but that provide apartments on each level, again with the potential for accessible units on the lower level. And then there are other types. There could be multiplexes, medium-sized multiplexes are considered middle housing, and at least in the Opticos website. Townhouses is a form of middle housing that we've actually seen a fair amount of development of in Bothell. They tend not to be as affordable as some of the other types of middle housing, and the typical configuration is 3 levels with tuck under parking on the lower level, an entry along with an entry and sometimes some livable space, and then 2 levels of housing above. So they're relatively large, and as many of you may be aware, they are also relatively expensive, and so one thing that I would like to explore with the commission tonight is to what degree we want to try to encourage some of the typically less expensive forms of middle housing. Another form in the lower left picture that we haven't really addressed, and I'm not sure that we will address in this effort, but could be addressed in future efforts, is our live-work units. So this would introduce some limited commercial space into residential neighborhoods potentially. But just to give a full picture of all the different types of middle housing. And beyond these ones, micro apartments, which we addressed in earlier code amendments, could certainly be considered middle housing in the sense of fitting that middle income bracket, affordable housing bracket, as do accessory dwelling units. And we're certainly open to other forms that anybody would like to bring to our attention as we look at this. So at this point, we've got a series of slides here to address the research that OTAC has done on middle housing approaches outside of Bothell. So I'm going to start by turning this over to Sierra Carson, and I believe Sarah will also join in this discussion. So Sarah, go ahead and take it away, and I'll advance the slides.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dave, and good evening and hello to the commission. Our first case study that we'll be talking about today is Kirkland, Washington. Kirkland has recently adopted middle housing code that allows 2 to 3 unit developments as well as cottage cluster housing in all residential zones. This middle housing is allowed at up to twice the density of the underlying zone. So for on any single family lot, you could build a duplex. These developments are still restricted though to the development regulations that apply to a single family home. Parking regulations for these missing middle housing developments are based on unit sizes, and they did adopt reductions in parking regulations for any developments that will be near transit services or high capacity transit. Additionally, Kirkland has adopted ADU code to allow up to 2 ADUs for every single family unit. ADUs have also been allowed in any 2 or 3 bedroom unit, any of these middle housing developments as well, so cottage housing developments and duplexes and triplexes. And they have adopted design standards for these developments to ensure compatibility with single family neighborhoods. Thank you. Next slide. Our second case study tonight is Tacoma, Washington. Tacoma, a few years back, adopted a residential infill pilot program. This allows missing middle housing types such as duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, cottage housing, townhomes, and ADUs to be developed anywhere in the residential zones at a very limited scale, so on a case-by-case basis. Last year, they upped and renewed the pilot program to allow up to 24 development projects in each of their council districts. These middle housing development types are regulated through development standards and design standards specific to each development type. And they have a separate handbook that regulates how they approve and approve these development types. Additionally, Tacoma, through their affordable housing strategy, has been working on incentivizing affordable housing and approving and streamlining the process to approve ADUs. They adopted phase 1 of their a home in Tacoma project back in November of 2021, which established a new housing growth strategy for the city. And they have recently started the process of expanding their residential infill program to expand middle housing choices citywide and upzoning areas near centers and near transit. Next slide, please. Seattle does not have middle housing regulations similar to these other cities, but they do have the residential small lot zone. This applies to any single family zone that's within an urban center boundary. And these allow up to 3 units per lot plus ADUs. So 6 units per lot per total of 6 units potentially per lot. As Dave said earlier, they've also recently updated their ADU code, which allows up to 2 ADUs per lot, either attached or detached, and removed ownership requirements as well as parking requirements. These are still regulated with development standards for size and location, etc. And we have this graph here again showing how these new incentives have really increased the availability of ADUs in the city of Seattle. Next slide, please. Our last local example of how middle housing regulations have been applied is in Snohomish County. Snohomish County has had cottage housing regulations since 2009, but after seeing no development of these housing types, they redid their code in 2016. This new cottage housing code allows cottage housing at up to twice the density of the underlying zone, with a minimum development with 4 units per housing development with no max. With these code developments, they did reduce the setback requirements and reduced their setback requirements and removed other regulations that were limiting how these developments were going to be owned in the future. Thank you. I will now pass it off to Sarah. She'll be talking about some regional and national examples.
Thanks, Sarah. I'll just introduce myself very quickly. I'm Sarah Breakstone. I'm a senior planner and project manager in OTUC's Portland office. And I am sort of transitioning to take over for Christina Hayworth when she gets ready to go on leave. So you'll probably be seeing more of me. Nice to meet everybody. Before I talk about Portland, would it be helpful to talk about House Bill 2001 at all, or is everybody pretty familiar with that piece of legislation that Oregon passed in 2020? Dave, is that worth mentioning, or people know what it is?
I don't think that we are probably paying a lot of attention to Oregon law. I mean, some of the commissioners may be, but I think it'd be good to give a little background.
Okay, I'll touch on it. So House Bill 2001 is Oregon's middle housing bill. It passed in 2020, and it requires cities of a certain size to update their zoning codes to allow middle housing types in all residential zones that allow a single family detached home. So if you're a city between 10,000 and 25,000 people, you are required to update your zoning code to allow just duplexes on any lot that allows a single detached home. If you are a city of more than 25,000 or a city of more than 1,000 in a metropolitan planning district, an MPO, then you are required to update your zoning code to allow all middle housing types in anywhere that a single family detached home is allowed. And the bill is focused on duplex, triplex, fourplex, cottage cluster, and townhomes. So those are the middle housing types that are addressed by House Bill 2001. It's been pretty interesting to watch the response from the various different cities that are subject to House Bill 2001. They are required to have their codes updated by June of this year. And oh my gosh, I think it's June of this year. So by June 2022, they need to have updated their codes. I could be off by a year. It might be 2023. It's been a while since I've looked at the rules. So a lot of cities are in that process now, and the state developed a model code. So if a city either wants to or is forced to, they can adopt the model code into their zoning code. It has design standards, development standards, all of the regulations that would be associated with the middle housing. My understanding is that most cities are taking their own path, not using the model code, but developing code amendments that are more suitable for their specific jurisdiction. So it's new, and there's no data on implementation yet. I think it'll be really interesting to take a look in 5 or 10 years to see what the impact is of this new legislation, but that's what's going on here on a statewide level. And I'm happy to answer any questions about that. We've been doing quite a bit of work with House Bill 2001, so I can probably answer most questions. Okay, so getting to Portland, another example, they last year adopted or implemented their residential infill project. And this involved code amendments that allowed duplex, triplex, and fourplex in their single dwelling zones. So I think they had 3 zones that were designated for single family development, and all 3 of those were impacted by the residential infill project. There are standards in that were also adopted that regulate size and scale, mostly through floor area ratio standards. There's also a bonus for affordability. If you can get up to 6 units, if half of those, so 3 units, are affordable at the 60% AMI standard. What other interesting pieces? There's no off-street parking requirement for these types of developments in these zones. They also have something that I don't think I've ever seen before, visitability requirements, which mostly has to do with the main entrances to the units. So you have to have at least one no-step, barrier-free main entrance. There's standards for wheelchair accessibility on the inside, and you have to have at least one bathroom and a living space accessible from the main entrance. So that's kind of a unique piece. And there's some other design standards and some flexibility for the way the units are configured on the site. They are kicking off RIP 2, which is the Residential Infill Project Phase 2, and that's going to look at implementing middle housing in some of their super low density zones that are out on the sort of the outskirts, sort of the fringe areas of Portland, where there are a lot of goal protected areas. So like natural hazard areas, environmentally protected areas, lots of overlays in these areas. And they're trying to figure out if and how they can also allow middle housing in some of those places, or if that's not a good idea. So again, pretty new approach for this city, and there's not a lot of data available yet to talk about, you know, what the impact is or what the impact will be. Next slide, I think. So this is just a glimpse at Cincinnati. They have a very form-based code approach to residential infill development. I think one of the reasons that we included this is because it's very in line with what is recommended by Opticos, which is the firm that really kind of brought missing middle housing to the forefront and has done a lot of analysis and a lot of work around middle housing. This is kind of their ideal, and the Cincinnati appears to have adopted it wholesale. So they have transect zones that reflect sort of the character of the land from as you move from the rural areas into the urban centers. They allow middle housing types in the middle zones, which makes sense. So they allow it in their suburban zone, their general urban, and their urban center zones. Those 3 transect zones allow middle housing, and there are very form-based design guidelines for middle housing types in each of those zones. And that's about the extent of the information I have on Cincinnati. We didn't dig too deeply on that one. Let me find my notes about Minneapolis. So Minneapolis is pretty interesting. They have what I would call maybe a hybrid form-based approach. They have a built form code, and within that code, they have these built form overlays, and the overlays relate or correspond to, again, sort of different landforms or different different scenarios. So they have like interior and center overlays, and then they have corridor overlays, and it kind of moves from the center out. So it's sort of transect like. Within those residential areas, they allow, within all their residential areas, they allow up to 3-unit developments to occur on a single lot. And there are different standards and different levels of flexibility for those types of developments, depending on which built form overlay they're in. So depending on what area they exist in. This was something interesting that I did not know. They don't have off-street parking minimums for any uses citywide. They only use parking maximums. I thought that was pretty interesting because there aren't too many cities that are doing that. Again, there hasn't been much implementation since this approach was adopted. So unfortunately, not a lot of good data or cool statistics to look at to see what kind of impact the rules have had and whether or not people are rushing to build middle housing. I think that's it. Oh, we do have one more slide that's sort of a summary slide. I don't think that we need to go back over it again, but this is available if anybody wants just kind of an at-a-glance comparison of the case studies that we looked at. I think that's
Great.
it. Questions for Sarah and I?
Yeah, before I move on, I've got a few more slides to share as well, but I'm going to stop sharing and then have an opportunity for questions about the research that Sarah and Sierra have presented.
So,
Oop, you're on mute.
yes, one click behind.
Yep.
So commissioners, any questions for the presenters thus far? Commissioner Dodd.
Yeah, I was going to ask, the parking maximum seems really interesting, and parking is something we've talked about a lot as a commission recently. Do you have any insight into how they converted from, I'm assuming they had minimums like most municipalities, how they converted from minimum to maximum? Like, was that less painful than revising the minimums? I'm just curious.
I don't know. I don't have any of that information. You know, a lot of jurisdictions where I've done work have both minimums and maximums. So it may be that they had that and they just got rid of the minimums and kept the maximums. Yeah, that's a good question. I know a lot of jurisdictions they set their maximum at a percentage of their minimum. So maybe they took that approach, like you can't have more than 150% of your minimum requirement or something like that. But I don't know how they came to their maximums. I'm sure it was a process. And I'm sure they had lots of robust discussions about it. But yeah, I don't have that information. It'd be interesting to find out more.
I think I can touch on that a little bit.
Yeah.
It looks like they've been looking at parking reforms since as early as 2009.
Your sound is challenging.
I do.
There you go.
I apologize.
Mic down.
Yes. So it looks like Minneapolis has been working on reducing their parking minimum since 2009, starting with more of their urban areas and areas close to transit and downtown. And then in 2015, adopted further parking reform to reduce parking requirements for buildings with units of 3 or more. So I think with this last sort of push for triplexes citywide, they were able to kind of maneuver this forward to reducing their parking minimums citywide. A little bit of background.
If I may also jump in, it hasn't really come into play, but Bothell, we did introduce parking maximums with the downtown plan, and it's a maximum level of surface parking. So the intent was to avoid large areas of surface parking. But if you put it in a structure, you can go down as far as you want to and build as many parking spaces as you want. But as you know, that development typically builds to the minimum.
Thank you. Commissioner Andrews?
When Minneapolis and Cincinnati were added to the research, is there something special or is there some comparison to Bothell that made those particular locations part of the research that we should be thinking about, or why were they included?
Well, that's a good question. I think that my understanding is that those two cities came up in prior discussions. Is that right? I know Minneapolis did. I'm not sure about Cincinnati. Sarah, do you have, or Dave, do you have background on that?
Yeah, I think in one of the early study sessions, when we talked about looking at other jurisdictions, there was a specific request by the commission to look beyond the local, the region. And then there also has been comments specifically about Minneapolis at previous meetings, and how and the comment had to do with the lack of implementation and how they're now looking at setback requirements as one way to remove an impediment.
Thank you.
Commissioner Curd?
Thanks. Yeah, and just to kind of append onto that too, at the Missing Middle Housing Walk way back when, I think we discussed a little bit about Opticos design and how kind of forward thinking their form-based plans were. And so maybe Senior Planner Boyd, maybe we inadvertently directed you to look into Cincinnati, or directed OTAC to look into Cincinnati.
Maybe that's that could be.
So anyway, great. Thank you so much for the presentation and for your research. These are really interesting to see what other jurisdictions are doing on the cutting edge. And even though there's not a lot of like empirical data, it's just good to kind of think about the challenges that each of these places face and how they're dealing with them. One of the things that I heard, especially coming from Portland in RIP, was accessibility. That's really interesting to me. A lot of times we see that, there's not a lot of affordable housing options, like natively affordable housing options for people who have limited mobility. And so that's really, really interesting to hear about. I want to hear more about that, and I want to look into it more. But I'm also wondering, a lot of critical areas, especially on the outskirts of Portland for RIP 2, are going to have to deal with drainage challenges and, other, steep slopes and that sort of thing that could also present challenges for accessibility. And so I know you mentioned, Sarah, that RIP 2 is still very much a work in progress, but is it ongoing? Are there resources that I can look into and meetings that I can watch? Or is that something that's still really preliminary?
It's in process. It's interesting because about 6 months ago, I did a series of case studies for the city of Portland to help them evaluate whether or not middle housing is doable in these areas for RIP 2. And what we found is that these zones are encumbered by natural hazard areas, wildfire areas, steep slopes, landslides, and coming out of that, not to mention multiple overlapping infrastructure constraints, drainage, outdated pipes, so all kinds of issues in these areas, and the idea of building middle housing in some of these areas is a little. It's tricky because you're putting more people in areas that are subject to natural hazards, which kind of goes against the intent of identifying natural hazard areas and staying out of them. But there's equity implications to not allowing middle housing in those neighborhoods. So there's just, yeah, there's a lot to think about, and they're still evaluating. I don't know where they are in the process now, but if you Google RIP2 Portland, they have a website and it's pretty up to date. You can probably get more information there. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Commissioners, I seem to have lost my video. I'm not sure what's going on here. I do see Commissioner Dodd, if you want to speak, and Commissioner Curd, if you could perhaps take over while I play around with settings a little bit and hope to come back.
Will do.
Thanks.
Thanks, Chair. Good luck. Commissioner Curd just reminded me, the visitability provisions out of Portland sound amazing. And I like that they're called visitability because it's a bathroom and a living area. So even if one of the residents of this unit is not the one that needs accessibility, if you have a parent or a sibling or a friend or something that needs, that ground level accessibility, you can rent one of those units. Like, that's so cool. So let's please steal that. Thank you.
We can take their code. It's online.
Director Cotterman.
Thank you. Just a quick question for the Portland, the visibility that sounds a lot like universal design. Do you know if is it an outgrowth of that? Is it similar to that, or does it go beyond that?
It's one of those. I'm not sure. I don't know a whole lot about the details of universal design, but I agree. It sounds very similar. But I don't know the extent to which universal design, I don't know how far it goes and what it touches on. So I would guess that this is related, although universal design doesn't that usually come in sort of building code? So I think what's a little bit unusual about this is that you're seeing it in the zoning code. Probably not the interior stuff. That's probably more in the building code, but the stuff about the main entrances and the no step, no barrier entrances and how you lay out the living space inside, it's all part of the zoning code, which I think is a little bit unique.
Yeah, it sounds like a progression or maybe a next generation version of what universal design was intended to address. Thank you.
Senior Planner Boyd. You're on mute.
Sorry about that. In Portland, have they only applied that visitability to middle housing, or is it being applied more widely?
That is a good question, and I don't know the answer. I didn't know about that piece of RIP until I was looking at it yesterday. I knew generally that it existed and I had done some work on it, but yeah, I didn't know about the visitability standards. So I didn't look to see if it's citywide. It's a good question. I'll check.
And part of the reason I asked that is kind of the question of whether it makes sense for us to address that in this effort, or if that's another one of those issues that we want to recommend be looked at it in a broader way in the city.
Yeah, it's a good question.
Are there any other commissioners with questions or clarifications on what's been presented so far? All right. Well, I don't have the cheat sheet for what's happening tonight, but is there?
Well, I if you all don't mind, I'll just stay in the dark here, and I think short of a full restart, this is as good as I can get based on the troubleshooting I've done. But I can see you all, and I think you can hear me, so I'll muddle through if there are no objections to that. So anyhow, Senior Planner Boyd, I think you had some things you wanted to ask us if we're at that point.
Well, actually, this was just a pause in the middle of the presentation, okay. So there's more to come. So let me start sharing my screen again. And Okay. That's interesting. Oh, here we go. Okay. And again, we're back to some images that some slides that you've seen, but I've tried to capture here in this section on issues, essentially where I think we've gotten to at this point, where the commission is on some of these issues. So we've talked about allowing multiplexes in new subdivisions and the notion of doing that and through a bonus system, allowing additional units in a subdivision and allowing those to be multiplexes of various types. So at least one commission, and the amount of bonus, I think, is still in play. At the last meeting, it was everything. I started off with a bonus of 20%, which is the maximum bonus that can be achieved in our cluster subdivisions. And I heard from commissioners everything from 20% is a good starting point, or at least 20%, to a specific suggestion that we increase the yield by 30% near transit and 20% elsewhere, and to going as far as Snohomish County did with cottages and doubling the capacity. So, and we're still doing some research on the implications of that in terms of what kind of environmental analysis we need to do. So I'm not expecting any decision on that tonight, but any further input on that from the commission would be useful. We think that the suggestion of 30% near transit and 20% elsewhere, or something along those lines, would be reasonable and would be defensible without doing significant additional environmental work on first blush. We've gotten feedback that the commission is interested in allowing duplexes through fourplexes on single family lots, and also interested in looking at options for things like courtyard apartments that may require a double lot for a courtyard apartment development that potentially goes as high as 6 or perhaps beyond 6 units. Cottage units, which again are more likely to happen on multiple lots or potentially entire subdivisions. And we haven't really talked a lot about whether we want to address larger stacked flats, which are included among the middle housing options. And before we look into that further, I was interested in hearing whether the commissioner the commission is interested in that. And then Mike Stenger wasn't able to join us or provide additional analysis on affordability requirements, but we have discussed that relative to work he's done in other situations where we've increased capacity in the same ballpark as we're talking about here, the 30% near transit, 20% elsewhere range. And the initial thinking is that that could produce a requirement similar to what we have in some of our inclusionary zones of 10% of the units affordable at 80% of area median income for ownership housing, and 60% for rental housing. With the understanding that these are more likely to be ownership units, but we would provide for both, I would think. So in a 20-unit plat, a 30% increase would allow up to 26 units on those 20 lots. So that could be done Two of those could be fourplexes, or it could be a mix of duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes up to 6 of the lots could be duplexes. And then we haven't really got into a lot of discussion about or analysis of courtyard apartment or cottage housing options, but those are also possibilities to consider. And with a 10% affordability requirement on those 26 units, then that would equate to 2.6 units, which could be provided by 3 affordable and contractually controlled affordable units, or 2 units plus a fee in lieu of the fractional unit. I'm going to talk a little bit more about in lieu fees later. We've talked about limits on building regulations. The general direction is to stick with single family dimensions, perhaps with some modest modifications to, as we did with corner lot duplexes, to explicitly allow some extension of non-conforming situations for existing buildings. And then at the last meeting, there was interest expressed in allowing reduced front setbacks in particular. And many of the examples that are shown on the Missing Middle website are do have substantially reduced front setbacks than our current 20 feet. So this example here, which I believe is a fourplex, is one example of that, and there are further images later. I think we have solid support for modifying the parking regulations, at least to the degree that we did for corner lot duplexes, which was based on proximity to transit and trails. So that would be at least a starting point. And I'm sure there'll be more discussion of that. And we might want to defer to some degree the parking discussion for the next session, where we will be presenting on both parking reductions and middle housing, but certainly open to input on that tonight, including I think there was considerable support for allowing middle housing options to count street parking towards their required parking. And then there was one caveat that we should consider parking management issues, and things like residential parking permit zones was raised. We don't think that that's probably a likely direction specifically. To date, Bothell only has permit parking around schools, including the campus. And we don't think that there's really going to be a need just for scattered middle housing options. We think there's enough street parking, and then including regulations to limit the number of curb cuts would also maximize the amount of street parking available. And another concern raised was street sweeping, but we think there are ways around that. And I'm trying to get some additional information from our Public Works Department on how they would manage that. But I think they have ways of notifying neighborhoods of when street sweeping is occurring, so that those areas can be cleared. I think we've heard pretty strongly that there isn't any interest for design requirements other than possibly some requirements regarding street presence, doors facing the street, and possibly, although with some caveats, maximum depth requirements, which the folks at Opticos have raised as something to consider to avoid projects where the majority of the units face to the side, and we really haven't had an opportunity to do a lot of analysis on that, so that remains an open question. The Optico site includes, here's another example of at least a duplex that has significantly less than a 20-foot setback. In fact, it looks like it's pretty much right at the porches, at least, are right up to the back of sidewalks. So there certainly are examples of middle housing with less than a 20-foot setback. The question is, how does that affect the feel of a single family neighborhood when the existing homes are set back 20 feet and then the new middle housing units have reduced setbacks? Is that counter to the argument that these will be built within the same envelope and therefore fit within these currently single family neighborhoods? Affordable housing provisions, I think where we're headed is that the multiplexes that are allowed in existing single family zones as infill projects will rely on those being tending to be naturally affordable, as we have with ADUs, whereas and where we will look further into affordability requirements will be on those larger developments, new subdivisions that get a bonus and an increased capacity that allows us to do the analysis and justify an affordable housing requirement. We've talked about the threshold. The current threshold has been developments of 5 units or more, where we have affordability requirements are required to provide affordable units or an in lieu fee. There's been some interest in raising that, particularly if we allow more than a fourplex in existing single family zones. And part of that discussion has been that if the requirement is 10%, you're not going to get a full unit until you get up to a 10 unit development. And other jurisdictions have used projects of 10 or more as the threshold for affordable housing requirements. Kirkland's recent middle housing requirements use 10 as a threshold. Part of that discussion has been those fractional units and the fact that we requiring it for less than 10 might result in lieu fees as opposed to units, and a preference. The code to date, our affordable housing section, gives a strong preference to providing the units on site as opposed to in lieu fees. And part of that has been that we haven't to date dealt with affordable housing in lieu fees. And the likely avenue for those would be that they would go into the Arch Trust Fund, and those funds then are used to fund affordable housing projects throughout the Arch area. The benefit of in lieu fees is that then those are combined and can be used for subsidized housing that reaches the lower income levels, so that we really can provide for 30% or 50% households that earn 30 to 50% of area median income or less. So that's a nuance in that discussion that I wanted to introduce for tonight's discussion. So just a quick recap. I'd appreciate any additional feedback on what the unit bonus for new subdivisions should be. Any feedback, and I realize we haven't given you a lot to go off of, but direction on whether you'd like us to come back to you with some analysis on combining lots for courtyard apartments and or cottage housing. I guess I wanted to see if there was broad support on the commission for taking a harder look at reducing front setbacks. There was at least one commissioner that brought that up last time around. And then any further input on modifying the parking regs to match what was done for corner lot duplexes and counting street parking, and any further discussion on parking management if we do go that direction. And then finally on design requirements. Any further thoughts on requirements to reinforce street presence and take a closer look at maximum depth requirements and how give and some whether you'd like to see some examples of what those would achieve, and now whether given the discussion about the visibility requirements in Portland, if that's something you would like us to take a look at as part of this as well. So ongoing analysis, we're still looking into how much we can increase density without not just additional environmental analysis, but also without comp plan amendments, because our comp plan, as we noted in the corner lot duplexes, does state that single family zones are exclusively single family. So we, with the corner lot duplexes, we felt like we could defer that to the comp plan update. But if we go much, we need to have a discussion about whether we need to address that sooner if we are going further into allowing middle housing more broadly. We're also still needing to address some ownership issues, either as part of these amendments or it could come as a separate analysis. So this has to do with whether to explicitly allow condominium ownership of middle housing, including ADUs, and along with that, incentives for more affordable housing. The option that was given of allowing a certain level of middle housing by right and allowing more units if a percentage of those units are affordable, contractually affordable. Another thing we need to look further into is whether absent state legislation, as was considered in the bills that didn't pass this round, whether the city can impose any restrictions on homeowner associations as far as whether they can preclude middle housing options, and on both on existing homeowner associations and future ones. So we're actually talking with our legal department tomorrow about that issue. We're also looking further into ways to encourage or require middle housing in new subdivisions, particularly ones near transit, either through minimum density provisions or other ways to do that. And as I said, Mike Stanger at Arch will come back on April 6th with more analysis on the affordability provisions. I also am looking into with our building official about building code implications of allowing middle housing, especially conversion of existing housing into middle housing. That's already been an issue that has come up with attached ADUs in existing housing, and so I assume it's going to be a similar issue with middle housing options. So, and I think this is going to be the final slide before we open it up for questions and discussion. The approaches that I put in the memo had to do with, again, the notion of allowing a 20% yield bonus on new subdivisions everywhere, and 30% near transit. Is that a target that the commission is comfortable with? Just confirming that the direction is to allow up to 4 plexes in any single family zone, which essentially would make the recent corner lot duplexes amendments moot. I had presented earlier some more incremental approaches, but the direction seems to be to allow up to 4 plexes everywhere. And then direction on whether commission would like us to do additional analysis of special provisions for courtyard apartments, cottage housing, and potentially larger stacked flats. Any input on affordability provisions that have been discussed to date, and any further input on revisions to accessory dwelling unit regulations, including allowing accessory dwelling units with attached housing outside of downtown. Currently, it's only allowed for detached single-family housing, except in the downtown sub-area. And we've had a recent request in Spirit Ridge for allowing one of the townhome units to have an accessory unit within that unit. So I can bring that as an example next time around, but would like to get some feedback on whether that's of interest to the commission. And then again, parking reductions in line with corner lot duplexes with on-street parking. So we can come back to this just to make sure we hit all of these points, or I'll keep it to the side, and I'll open it up for questions, clarifying questions first, any public comment, and then commission discussion and direction. And just the next step after this, we are planning to bring this back on April 6th, along with parking reductions near transit, and then move on into public hearing and recommendations potentially on May 18th. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and open it up for questions. And then
all right. Thank you, Dave. Very informative presentation. I think, as you know, this is of great interest to the commission. What I'd like to do is we had an individual who indicated a potential for wanting to give some public comment on this. Invite that person to comment if they're still interested, and then take a brief break before we go back to your issues and commission discussion, quite frankly, to let me reboot my computer and play with my camera, if there are no objections to that. So Director Cotterman, would you check if that individual is still there and if he would like to share some comments with the commission?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, he is still there. So let me panel him in. Hello, Mac. Okay, Mac, you're muted right now. So Mac, there you are. Okay, so You have 3 minutes, Mac. Go ahead. Mac, we can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Now we can hear you. Yes. I'll start your 3 minutes over. Go ahead.
All right. So anyway, as I was saying, I'm Matt Carter. I live just north of the downtown, past 190th, in what I would recall probably the forgotten Maywood Hill lower area between 190th and the Catholic Church. We have a large amount of area here that's, schools, churches. It's a very, very, commutable space. It seems to be left out of all the discussion, everything that's going on. It's an old neighborhood. It's not a new subdivision, but it has large lots. My lot personally is close to 16,000 square foot, has no less than 3 access points to go into drive-in vehicles on, and it has a house that's 970 square feet. This brings up some interesting problems when it comes to trying to go into either, make the property to where it's able to go on to do more for access, ADUs and things like that. One of the things that we did when we last went to go and look for an ADU possibility was we were told that it was limited to the house size that's currently on the property, which makes a whole lot of sense when you're talking about 16,000 square feet and a 970 square foot house, right? Obviously, there's more room for more spaces of people to go and to be on this property. My wife and I, we go and we estimate that we could probably put in about 5 to 6 townhouses in here with a central courtyard area for the drive to go and to take the cars off the street. But we're not allowed to go and to do anything because of the zoning and the restrictions that are on this property, because we are in an R8400 zoning. To the northwest of me and to the south of me, though, within roughly a block, you're down to 2,800 for the R zoning, which means that there's a much higher density just within a short distance. The house directly to the north of me is basically the same size lot. It was divided in half in the past. If I go just in a stone's throw distance to the west of me, there's a lot that's 5,000 square feet. I'm still limited on what I can go and I can do on my property to go and be able to potentially put more housing on it, to be able to offer it to anyone, even family, who I have a lot of my family is now in their 70s, and they could go and they could use an ADU, frankly, that's near a younger, healthier family member, right? Because their housing costs are going up. I can't provide that because if I do, I'm supposed to go and be something like 60% of my house. That's a 600 square foot space at the most. When the space that's on my property could go and handle an enormous amount of space in residential living. I also view the fact that the local schools, the churches, the fact I'm close to downtown makes it within the transit area. From what I saw in the slides, we're at least in the T3 suburban Cincinnati area, I would say, in this one neighborhood. Again, we're not considered in this downtown area, but it seems to me like that T3 should be expended out to go and to take in areas where we're talking about schools, public places that are connected to the downtown.
Mac,
right?
your 3 minutes is over. Could you wrap up, please?
So basically, I'm hoping to go in to get some decisions and new zoning put through as soon as possible. It's been a process that we've been looking at for over 15 years, trying to figure out what we can do with our property. I really would like to have something in the next year or two to go and be able to actually make something of what I have here that can be accessible to my family and others. Hopefully that can go and be done and be dealt with. Unfortunately, I won't be at for the 6th, but I will try to make the May 18th meeting as well.
Okay.
Mr. Carter, thank you for your comments. I think you'll find a lot of sympathy on the commission for your position, a lot of desire to add housing infill within Bothell. Unfortunately, I think your 1-year timeline is probably overly optimistic, but we are very interested in moving in that direction. So I guess stay tuned is all I can say. Thank you for your comment.
And I'd also suggest, Mr. Carter, that you contact Dave Boyd. If you email him with your contact information, he'd be happy to talk to you about comp plan amendments, rezones, and kind of keep you apprised of the progress on this topic that's before the commission.
Okay. Yeah, I believe I may have Dave's contact from previous.
Yeah, I believe we have spoken, and I would say that it's possible that these middle housing amendments may provide you some options that you don't have now. And we're hoping that we'll be able to have these adopted at least potentially this summer. We're shooting for adoption this summer, so there may be some relief in the near term.
Yeah, that'd be nice. My neighbors actually to the north of me on the 2 lots also would like to go and possibly go into redo their properties with multiple housing as well. But of course, they're limited to the single zone as well, except for the one who's on the corner who can do a duplex.
Well, again, there is a tremendous amount of interest on the commission in allowing this sort of development. So stay tuned. Thank you for your comment. Director Cotterman, anyone else?
There is one other in the attendee room. I'm not sure. Same initials as Matt Carter, so I'm not sure if it's someone else or trying to. Okay.
I do see that Chair Kiernan is offline, so I'll take over.
Lost him. Okay.
So I guess, Director, if you could invite the next person in to give public comment, and then we'll answer a couple of questions on the commission that I see.
Okay. Actually, it looks like I may have demoted him to attendee. I'm not sure how I did that, but I do have one other person in the attendee room.
Yes, I'm back at least. Sorry
about that, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure how I did that.
Well, one of the lesser of our problems thus far. So I guess we have someone else who may have an interest in speaking.
I have initials only, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, hey, this is Mark Calkins, the other MC. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. If you just wait 1 second, Mark, I will bring you in as a panelist. Did you want to speak on this topic?
Not on this topic. I was actually interested in the beekeeping ordinance.
Oh, okay. We'll bring you back in at that time then. Thank you. Okay, then that's all I have this evening, Mr. Chair, for this topic.
All right, then if the other commissioners would grant me a little grace here, let's take a 10-minute break. I'll log off and hopefully come back and you'll be able to see me. And I'll be in touch with Director Cotterman if there are some other issues that require Commissioner Curd to take over. So I've got 7:35. See you all in 10 minutes. Welcome back to the March 16th meeting of the Bothell Planning Commission. We just heard a presentation from Senior Planner Boyd on middle housing. He presented with us a number of issues to discuss. What I'd like to do is first ask commissioners if they have any clarifying questions regarding the information that Senior Planner Boyd presented to us, and then run through the areas that he is asking for direction or input from us on. So, and as you can see me. Amazing. Turn it off and turn it back on, and it worked. So, commissioners, any clarifying questions or comments regarding what we just heard? Commissioner Dodd.
I guess we just want to clarify, is the 30, sorry, is the 30% and 20% increase, is that based on what we think we can get without further like environmental review? Or I guess, where did those numbers come from specifically?
Well, last meeting, I started with a suggestion that 20% bonus was likely justifiable without significant additional environmental analysis based on what was done with cluster housing. My recollection, my notes show that you had suggested the 30% near transit and 20% elsewhere. I thought that was a good incremental increase, and probably still within that level. But we do need to do a little more analysis to give you a hard answer on that. I guess what I wanted to know is whether the commission as a whole was comfortable with that general those amounts in general. If they'd like us to push the envelope further, if there's room to go, or just what the sense of the commission is.
That makes sense, and that does sound like me. Thank you.
Commissioners, feedback for Dave on that? Commissioner Westerbeck.
Thank you, Commissioner Westerbeck here. I believe I was also taken from the clustering ordinance. Those are bonuses that you derive from that, and which I've looked at a lot in our clustering ordinance. And it doesn't feel to me like, given the housing emergency we're in, that 20 to 30% is enough. I would think at least within a half mile of transit or certain services, urban areas, whatever, Canyon Park, downtown, we would want to go basically double, more like what Snohomish has with their cottage code, where you can double the density. Most of the lots around here, I walk around and ride my bike around town a lot, all over the Northwest, really, not just Bothell. We have so much unused land, just huge amounts. Just like Mac was talking about earlier, there's just so much languishing land where we could get housing on. And a lot of people, probably wouldn't even bother them that much because there's just, vast yards. And so I think that 20, 30% is pretty meager. I really think it should be a lot more. And I'm not talking 50, 60, I'm talking double it. We should start with doubling it. So that's my comment on that, because we are in a ever spiraling problem with housing, and it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. And the state didn't get anything done. So at least in Bothell, we can actually move the needle. It's us. It's up to us. We can move the needle. Let's help people like Mac help us. Let's let him help us. He wants to do, 3, 4, 5, 6 units on 16,000 square feet within like a half a mile. I know his neighborhood. I've got a project up there. It's a half mile of downtown. I mean, that is where we need to be building homes. And there's still going to be tons of green space there, and stormwater probably wouldn't be an issue even if you put a number of units there. I mean, 16,000 square feet is a lot. So anyway, we can do a lot with that. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Westerbeck. Other commissioners? Commissioner Curd.
Thanks. This is Karsten. I sort of echo Commissioner Westerbeck. I looked into this provisions in Kirkland and non-existent provisions in other neighboring jurisdictions and found the doubling in Kirkland to be really enticing. I don't think that a lot of jurisdictions have had a lot of success with ADUs in the past because they haven't taken strong enough strides. And even with the largest strides that you can take, we're still seeing, we're seeing an uptick, but that's market driven. That's because of absolute need. That's not just because people's minds are changed. So I think that doubling does make a lot of sense. And my comments before about 20 or 30% were really contingent on the fact that I guess it was kind of presented that the environmental review would be really challenging and really hard to work through and would be more of like a comp plan type process. And so I'm really curious, like Commissioner Dodd said, about what we can actually do right now and what might need to be a longer term measure, but basically as high as possible and using transit proximity as a good indicator for what's likely possible under current environmental analyses.
Senior Planner Boyd.
I just wanted to just make sure that everybody's clear. We're talking about bonuses for new subdivisions here. So we've already I think we've got clear direction that the commission is supportive of allowing up to 4 plexes on individual lots everywhere, which in theory would be quadrupling the density, but I think the analysis there is that a relatively small percentage of property owners are going to do that, so that the net effect is probably similar or probably even less than what we're the 20% or 30% in a new subdivision. And if we were to double the yield in a new subdivision, I guess one question is, at what point does that essentially become the same as a rezone, an upzone, and a significant one at that. So I'll look into those issues and be able to get back to you with a better answer. But that's kind of why we're keeping within the range of what has been done to date in terms of the bonuses.
Commissioner Robson.
Thank you. I wanted, along those lines of new development, I wanted to kind of talk about combining lots and what kind of increases and percentages we can see by that. Frankly, I just want cottage courts everywhere. They're adorable. I am big time pro cottage court. If we could just make everything cute little cottages, if there's a zoning thing we can do for that, I'm in support of that. But I would like to know what kind of increased yield we can expect, like reasonably, and what kind of further analysis would be needed to be done for that. What can we expect? Because I'm very pro combining.
Dave, do you have any comment to that?
I would just say that, and I'll also get back to Commissioner Westerbeck's comment on Snohomish County's provisions for cottage housing, doubling the yield. As far as I know, those provisions only apply to cottage housing developments. So we may need to look at cottages and potential courtyard apartments somewhat separately, because both are going to most likely require more than a single family lot. So, but and that was one of the questions, I think it's further down, is whether that's something that the commission would like us to look further into. So beyond allowing up to duplexes on a single family lot, should we also look at special provisions for cottages and courtyard apartments?
Commissioner Robson?
I was just wondering, with cottage courts, then, does that essentially double the yield from when you combine essentially per lot? Would that double the yield? What could we expect if by combining lots? What kind of increased yield?
Well, just as a for example, if we allowed, up to 4 plexes on any single family lot, and then allowed cottage courts that combine 2 single family lots to create up to 8, that would be the same overall yield. So in the case of a new subdivision that got a bonus of, say, 8 additional units, they could, or 7 additional units, let's just, they could do that with, they could do that with a cottage, an 8-unit cottage courtyard on 2 lots, basically. That would give them that flexibility. If they preferred, they could do it, spread it out among 4plexes, duplexes, and triplexes.
Commissioner Robson, do you still have a question? Your hands. Okay. Commissioner Dodd?
Thanks, Chair. Hearty second to Commissioner Robson wanting cottages everywhere. Let's just tear the whole city down and build cottages. Not really. That's not a serious thing, just for anyone who wants to quote me on that later, but I love it. And then just to circle back to the density, I agree with what Commissioner Kurd said, which is let's get as much as we can without the complicated environmental review, and as much as we can before the comp plan update. I think that makes the most sense. As Commissioner Westerbeck said, there's definitely a huge crisis on just a shortage of units. So I think whatever we can do to encourage is what we should do as commissioners. So yes, on that. And then combining lots makes sense to me. As if the project is going to follow what's allowed, taking a little bit more on a second lot makes sense. More cottages or more units. I think I don't see a lot of downsides there, especially if they're adorable and cottages. Okay, I've said cottages enough. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Dodd. Other commissioner comments or questions? I think one of the challenges we have is under the umbrella of middle housing, we're talking about a lot of distinct things. We're talking about new developments and what to allow there. We're talking about infill and what happens there. So there are a lot of balls in the air. I think it's pretty clear that the commission is very interested in increasing the housing supply, the middle housing supply, as much as possible and as quickly as possible. So what we can do under the current plan is certainly, from what I hear from other commissioners, of great interest. And I think we'll all be interested as the comp plan moves forward, seeing how we can incorporate these concepts into the new plan, allowing further expansion under that environmental review, without more environmental review for each project. So that's my take on it. Dave, do you want to go to your specific questions to get feedback? I think that's some general comments you've gotten. Oops.
First question was about this idea of 20% in new subdivisions everywhere, 30% near transit. So what I'm getting is that there's interest in going beyond that, as Commissioner Dodd said, as far as we can go without incurring extensive environmental review. And even that is mean, I don't think there's a hard and fast answer there, but we'll give that some more consideration and also perhaps do some. We've done some research on what other jurisdictions have done. Some have gone the route of an amendment to their previous comp plan, SEPA. Some have simply issued a DNS, which is what we typically do with code amendments, and some have done modified determination of non-significance. Excuse me for lapsing into acronymies. So anyway, I've got good feedback there, and feel free to weigh in otherwise. I just also wanted to confirm the direction I've heard so far, that there is support for allowing up to 4 plexes everywhere on existing single-family lots everywhere, and with the recognition that basically makes the corner lot duplexes kind of moot if we allow up to 4 plexes everywhere. I'm seeing
we'll pause briefly. I think you've got a strong consensus there. I'm seeing.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
And we already touched on this a little bit. I've heard good support for additional analysis to consider special provisions for courtyard apartments, cottage housing, and then I guess the other one is and potential larger stacked flats, which we haven't really discussed that much to date. So, for example, if we would allow 2 lots to be combined to create a 8-unit courtyard apartment development, and one reason for that is the ends of those courtyard units. There typically is a U-shaped structure. The ends then would still be in a scale similar to the surrounding single-family homes. Would we also allow 2 lots to be combined to do an 8-unit stacked flat development? Is that something we should look at?
Commissioner Westerbeck?
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify, I did understand that was bonuses earlier, but you're right, it gets muddied by the fact that, and we're superseded by, if we go 4-plex everywhere, it's a moot point. Also, before I was on Planning Commission, I was the one who submitted the request on the docket a couple years ago to look at cottage code. And I know our OTEC consultants probably know this. We can lift cottage codes, existing ones, out of multiple different jurisdictions and really just borrow them or tweak them. I was reading a couple today, in fact. So I realized, within the missing middle umbrella, cottage code is one. You got your what do we call them again? Sorry, I got on the spot and I forget things. The
courtyard apartments.
Courtyard apartments, exactly, which are kind of a version of like an attached cottage. So it seems like we'd have sections of. I was looking at Olympia's today, for example, and they have some more. They passed some missing middle density provisions and things like that. They're mild, but they're more than we have. And then they have, like most of these cities that have cottage codes and courtyard housing, they have sections for that. So cottage housing, is, as we all know, is around a green or a common, parking's aggregated off to one side and things like that. So just to recognize that we are going to have a little, some stratification within our missing middle zone, land use code as we change it, I think. So anyway, I just want to recognize that there is going to be a little bit of that, and that we're going to probably have to address the different types, just like you alluded to, Dave. Courtyard's different than cottage, different than a standard standalone lot. And then, and that last question you brought up, yeah, it does seem like we would want to allow provisions for, up to 2 lots or something like that, that could be aggregated into an 8-unit project or something like that. So I would agree with that.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Westerbeck. Other commissioner comments on that topic? Director Cotterman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick note on the stacked flats. We haven't really talked much about that, as Dave said. So I think it's important that we have a common definition of that. And the definition that was being used in the proposed legislation was that each floor would be a single apartment. So that's the stacking, basically. So it's not the side by side, like some of the examples that Dave showed earlier with the duplexes or fourplexes. So in the case of a stacked flat, the number of units is going to be limited as much or more by the height limitations for single family zones than anything else.
And the building code, stair codes, things like that.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And fire ratings.
So I think the question this evening is that a housing variety that you want to make sure is accommodated to the extent that we can, within the limitations of the codes?
I think from what I've heard from the commission, there's an interest in allowing as much variety as we can fit in to allow creativity in meeting the needs. Commissioner Dodd?
That's exactly it, Chair. Thanks. I think Bothell can seem very homogenous at times, and so variety would be exciting just for aesthetic reasons. But I also personally think let's allow all types, and then within the different, like you were saying, height, fire codes, like all these other things that are going to come into play, we might see some types in some neighborhoods and not in others. So let's just say do what you can within the other structures that are here, and I like that a lot. So
Senior Planner Boyd?
So when I'm talking about stacked flats, notwithstanding what the state legislation was contemplating, I'm thinking more along the lines of a 2/2 fourplex. So you basically have 2 units on the ground floor and then 2 units above. Then if we're talking about single family height limits, we're really limited to 3 floors maximum. So you can do the stacked triplex, the triple decker, but that's really the maximum you could do if you were limited to 1 unit per floor. But in theory, if you could do 2 connected triple deckers and have 6 unit stacked flats. We can look into that and come back with some thinking on that. There may be good reason to limit options of where you combine 2 lots and allow some additional units to courtyard apartments, just in terms of fitting into the single family fabric and staying consistent with housing that is of the scale of a single family house. But we'll do some more research on that.
Okay, other commissioners? Commissioner Gustafson.
Thanks, Chair. Sarah Gustafson here. My question is about the ownership questions. What kind of questions are you thinking of, and when would we start looking at those?
One thing, we have a limited amount of funding for OTAX support on this. So we have certain constraints on how far we can go with these amendments. So some jurisdictions, as part of their middle housing, have adopted provisions for allowing separate ownership of ADUs or duplex units through condominium provisions. We haven't looked into that a whole lot, or whether that is going to fit within our scope for this project. But so it's possible that we do it in phases. We approve the physical form for middle housing and come back later with another code amendment that addresses the ownership issues, or it may be that we can tackle that with this effort. But basically, that's a one wrinkle of this that we haven't talked a lot about, and just wanted to get a sense of the Planning Commission's take on that.
Commissioner comments? Commissioner Curd.
Thanks. This is Karsten. I think I see ownership requirements inherently linked with condominiumization. That's a word, I think. So I fully support condominiumization of missing middle units because it does offer entry-level affordable options into what is typically seen as a restricted housing market. Pursuing housing options myself right now is grim, but I think that if there were like condo type options with missing middle forms, that could certainly go far into answering some of the concerns that we all share about being priced out of the city, and children and growing professionals in our city not being able to find a place in our city. So condominiumization is how I think it's the mechanism for which we achieve affordable ownership. And yeah, so I think that for me, that question is really asking about condominiumization, and I'm all for it.
Thank you. Commissioner Dodd.
I would agree and add that ownership opportunities of these missing middle properties also allows folks to downsize as they grow out of their large single family homes, which is a thing that I've heard from a lot of my neighbors and a lot of just older friends in the city, people I've known since I was a kid, who now are like, they feel kind of stuck or they have to leave to find something that fits what they want. Because I think the focus on low income senior housing downtown is great. But not everybody wants to downsize straight to an apartment. There's got to be like a middle ground. So I think more options would be great there.
Thank you. Senior Planner Boyd.
I just wanted to note that there's at least one other ownership option besides condominiumization, which is not a term that I am fond of either, especially if I have to say it. It's hard enough to spell it. But the other option, of course, is creating fee simple lots. So basically vertical middle housing. And that's what we've been seeing for the most part, partly because Washington State condominium law does have some flaws. The legislature has tried to fix that, but I'm not sure if they have solved all of the problems there. But basically, townhomes are, most of the townhomes that we see being developed are on fee simple lots. So the more affordable forms of middle housing, the stacked duplexes and fourplexes, those really, as far as I know, the only way to provide those as ownership housing is through condominium structure. So,
thank you. Other commissioner comments? Commissioner Westerbeck.
Since that came up, I had a note about the condozation versus fee simple. So I was going to say that one of the reasons that we see so many townhouses being in the industry is two things. They they're allowed to be built under the more simple residential code, the International Residential Code, the IRC. And the stacked flats have to be built under the International Building Code, the more complex building code, because my fourplex that I live in is under that one. And it costs a little bit more and it's a little more complicated. So those production builders love the townhouse because it's essentially just a skinny house with a firewall next to another skinny house, and they're repeatable. But as we've all seen, they're as expensive as houses now. So anyway, I think it's just good for us all to understand. That's one of the reasons we see so many townhouses, because there's a big bureaucratic hurdle to get to a stacked flat in the building code itself, as well as the condo law makes them totally undesirable to builders, developers, and architects. Totally, like they've just said, our law is really punitive, even though they tried to fix it, I think 3 years ago. It's a little better, but it hasn't primed the pump. And that's why we don't have condos newer than basically 30 years old now. They're the newest condos, roughly. So anyway, I think that's just good to know. So we might actually, in time, in another round, in a year or two, whatever, be talking about building code tweaks or something like that. City of Nashville actually just did a huge thing. I think it was Nashville. They actually did some code tweaks of their building code, not their land use code, to allow more than 2 units, because that's where it usually cuts off for the simpler building code. 3 units or more is the more complicated building code. And so they made that change and a few others, so you could actually build missing middle under the simpler building code, which they hope will hasten more of those getting built. So anyway, I think it's really important to know, because that's one of the reasons we don't see stacked flats, and a lot of people aren't going to take that harder option, condoization and the harder code. Anyway, wonky stuff, but I think it's worth knowing because it really affects what gets built.
Thank you, Commissioner Dodd.
That's fascinating because I had no idea. This is far from my day job. So I guess my question is, and this is probably a very basic question, but do we have any oversight into building code changes or just land use zoning?
Some jurisdictions have modified building codes, the IBC and the IRC, the International Building Code and the International Residential Code. But in this area, Seattle is the only one that I'm aware of that has done that, at least extensively, and most smaller jurisdictions just aren't able to do that, take on that those kinds of modifications. But we do participate in roundtables with other jurisdictions to talk about changes to building codes. Those do happen slowly, similar to the condominium codes or laws. So that's again not necessarily within the purview or certainly within the scope of this amendment, but there could certainly be a finding or findings both that we advocate for those kinds of changes, both in the building code and in condominium legislation. And the city does do some advocacy on the legislative front. So,
and I think Commissioner Dodd's question went to the Planning Commission's role in this as much as the city's role. Is that correct, Commissioner Dodd? And then what I think I heard you say, Senior Planner Boyd, was that the route for the commission to take a position would be in a finding.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. So we might ask Commissioner Westerbeck to keep that in mind when it comes to findings, to perhaps suggest something.
Yeah, that's a section of the code that does not fall under the purview of the Planning Commission. That goes directly to the City Council. And just to emphasize a couple of things that Dave said, cities can adopt their own building codes. And as he noted, Seattle's the only one that really has done that because they have the wherewithal to do that. Most other cities follow the International Building Code, which includes the IRC and other components to that. We can be more restrictive. We can modify that code if we're being more restrictive. We cannot be less restrictive. That's because that's what's adopted by the State Building Code Council. So because we have decided to follow that code, that's what we're limited in terms of what we can do. But as Dave mentioned, we're also paying attention to that and work with one of my favorite acronyms, which is the Washington Association of Building Officials, or WABO. They track all that pretty closely. And I know our building official, Dave Swayze, is heavily involved in that and also on the legislative side. So we do pay attention to that. And I appreciate Commissioner Westerbeck bringing this up, because that's been one of my laments for several years, is all of the things that we try to hang on the GMA Christmas tree to address affordable housing is really missing the mark when it comes to things like building code, which has in some cases a greater impact on costs, particularly for things like ADUs, than anything we put in the land use code. So thank you for bringing that up, Commissioner Westerbeck.
Okay, other commissioner comments to this point, or Dave, you want to lead us forward?
The next question I wanted to get some feedback on had to do with the affordability provisions. Granted that we haven't given you any specific or kind of a general idea of the in the range of 10% at 80% AMI for ownership housing. But I guess more to the point is getting back to the discussion of what the threshold should be, whether we should stick to the current threshold of where we do require affordability. And again, this would only be for new plats. Do we want to stick with the 5 units or more threshold, and which would tend to generate some in lieu payments for those partial requirements, or do we want to look at raising that threshold, and just for middle housing or more broadly for all affordable housing requirements?
Mr. Anders.
Thank you. This is Tony Anders. I know that I'm very new to this, and this is a little bit foreign, but when we talk about affordability requirements for units of 5 or more, it brings me back to a comment about townhouses and how they're becoming so expensive now. And I wouldn't want us to not at least consider some kind of an affordability requirement, even in fourplexes or duplexes, because we assume that they're going to be affordable. Maybe they won't. You know, at some point, townhouses were affordable, and now they're not anymore. And it may not be feasible to do it, but I think we should at least consider it.
So,
thank you.
Your audio the quality isn't great. So I think I understood your comment though. In terms of whether these would apply to townhomes or smaller developments, we're really only talking about affordability requirements for new developments. Again, if to the extent that we would allow townhouse units, up to 4 or 6 or 8, whatever number we land on within a new subdivision in a single family zone, and then say if it was just a 5 lot zone or a 5 lot plat, and a developer came in and said, okay, I want to do 5 townhomes with 0 lot line, would that be allowed? And then in that case, would the affordability requirement kick in? And in most it looks like that would result in a fractional affordable unit that the developer could either choose to round up and provide one unit, or they could also choose to pay a fee in lieu of that fractional unit.
Thank you. And hopefully I'll lean in and try and get my audience together next time. My point was to not necessarily limit it to 5 or more, but to think about fourplexes and triplexes and duplexes, just because we can't count on them being naturally affordable over time. And I know we're talking new, but everything's getting to be so expensive. So if we could at least consider the fourplex and the triplex within that affordability framework, I think it would be helpful.
And so, yeah, we can look at what other jurisdictions have done, and also think creatively about how we could address that. So far, the discussion has been, unless we lower the threshold, that standalone fourplex, we would not require a contractual affordability level, but that we would count on those types of housing as being likely to be more affordable naturally. The one example that I did come across was a jurisdiction that allowed, I think, up to 3 units per lot, and then if they would allow more than that with an affordability requirement. So that's one avenue we could explore.
Commissioner Robson.
Thank you. I really agree with Commissioner Anders' point on this, that I'm very concerned about even these duplexes, fourplexes, becoming just astronomically cost. And I do think I really support Dave's point about, if they want to build 3, they don't need an affordability, but to put that extra 4th one on there, I think that's interesting. I think that's something maybe we should explore. But I also think that going over 4 on a lot and doing fee in lieu is good. I mean, we have a flexibility with Arch, and then we can maybe break in some pathways for affordable housing in places that don't specifically offer low, that have affordable housing built into them, but we can use the in lieu and fund for supportive housing. So that's where I'm coming from.
Okay, other commissioners? Commissioner Westerbeck.
Thanks. I'll be quick. There is an example. I think it might have been in our packet, but I believe it's City of Portland. They took the Oregon HB 2001. Yeah, Dave's nodding. He knows. Idea a bit further, and you can do 4. Maybe you already said this. I might have missed it. You can do up to 4plex in Portland, but then if you want to do 6, you have to make a percentage. I think it's maybe those extra 2 affordable. So it's just basically a density bonus, but it ensures inclusionary zoning, a couple of affordable units. So that's probably a viable model. So I bring it up.
I think what I read was in Portland was if you went to 6, half of those had to be affordable.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Yeah, I couldn't remember. So that's pretty good.
Okay, other commissioners? I'm pretty sure I've mentioned this before, but I have increasing concerns with AMI. And I don't know what other tool there is, but as more and more houses are well over $1 million in Bothell, I'm going to guess the median income is soaring for those new home buyers as well. So 80% of some of these very high new incomes is still not going to be affordable for a lot of people. It's more of a comment than anything, but perhaps a recognition of the condition and a search for an answer.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, that is becoming a growing concern. And I know in affordable housing circles, there's a lot more conversation happening about that. And what I think happens is what we see is that people's incomes are not keeping up with the cost of housing. And so where we may have had a certain proportion of the population in that 80% area median income category, we're now seeing them go more into the 60% or 50% category. So the need then for that lower income level housing is increasing exponentially versus the overall need for affordable housing.
Yes, we've talked about 80 and even 60. I think we need to be open to lower numbers there.
And just to we talk about these percentages and just wanted to remind folks that what it really is that when we talk about housing that's affordable to households at 80% area median income, first of all, the area median income in our case is based on King County area median income, so it's not just Bothell, and it's housing that's affordable to households earning 80% of area median income and spending 30% of that income on the housing. So that's the other variable in this equation that may get looked at is whether that 30% number is the right number to be using. But currently, that's what it's based on.
Thank you. Other comments, questions? All right, Dave, next topic.
Okay, and
Dave, can I just ask a quick question? How many more topics do we have to go through? Because we still have another item on the agenda this evening.
Yeah.
As well.
Well, there were two, and I was actually just we can bring I'll leave it up to the commission. We can bring these back on April 6th because I think we're going to do some analysis on these two anyway. So the first one was whether we should make some revisions to our ADU code to allow ADUs for townhomes, for example, outside of downtown, and not just for detached single-family homes. And the other, I guess, was just confirming past direction on having parking reductions in line with what we did for corner lot duplexes, plus including on-street parking. So unless I hear any strong questions on those two, we'll just come back to you with some additional analysis on those two.
Okay, if you were going to do the initial analysis anyway, I think it would be good to be informed by that analysis for our discussion.
And I think we have some initial direction on both of those as well.
Oh, thank you very much. And we've got our work cut out for us for is it 2 weeks? 3 weeks. We do have 3 weeks before April 6th. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I think it's clear that there's a tremendous amount of interest on the part of the commission on this topic. So we're very thankful for the work you do on it. Look forward to hearing more.
Thank you.
So, Director Cotterman, to our next item.
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. So I would like to introduce, I'm hoping that she's here. I know she's been listening. Hopefully she's gotten back to her computer. I'd like to introduce Christine Allworth. Christine is in the Community Development Department, and she is our Code Compliance Officer and has been for, is it 3 years now? About 3 years. And before that, Christine was permit coordinator. So she's very familiar with the code and she has one of those jobs that I'm just in awe of her ability to deal with all of the issues that you deal with as a code compliance officer. So tonight she's going to talk about hobby beekeeping, because this is a code compliance issue that came up this past year, in fact, and created some challenges for Christine and myself in terms of how we would deal with it. So she has a short presentation, I believe, and then we do have one person who would like to speak on this item. And then we're looking for some direction from the commission this evening before we come back to you with a proposed code and public hearing. So Christine, if you want to share your presentation.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Like Mike said, I'm trying to share my screen. Please forgive me because I am not as good at Zoom as I am with Teams, as that's what we use more often. So hopefully you guys can see this.
Yes, we can.
Yep.
Okay, great. So like Mike said, we are not asking for any action at this time. We're just requesting direction. We'll take any feedback and we will prepare it for the public hearing on April 20th. So I am here to talk about residential hobby beekeeping. This hasn't been too much of an issue here in Bothell, but I kind of foresee it becoming maybe one, because I do see it kind of becoming a little bit more popular. We've only had 2 specific complaints that I could really find back in the system. 2018 was before my time. I did read over the notes. They were very brief, very short. It was pretty cut and dry. They received a complaint. This house was kind of notorious for some other issues. So I think she had a pretty easy go with it to ask them just to remove the bees. So that was pretty cut and dry on that one. And they did, and that was great. And that one was resolved really quickly. The complaint in 2021 is a little bit more complicated. The neighbors were upset. The beekeeper in question, he had 2 hide boxes in his backyard. He had set up everything that he needed to, in my opinion. He had water, he had he was meeting setbacks. He was being very respectful, I believe, of his neighbors. They were concerned because they were claiming they were unable to use or enjoy their backyard during this time. It was discovered throughout this process of dealing with this complaint and talking to the beekeeper. He was very helpful, very knowledgeable, always willing to help. He had gone over to a couple of neighbors' houses who did have some wild hives that were there that he did help remove, and he actually got to another beekeeper in Snohomish County to rehome those bees. And those weren't actually his bees. They were also located near a park, so that was kind of causing some issues with some of the bees as well. So there was a little bit more factors going into this complaint that weren't just his honeybees that he was keeping at his house, I suppose is what you'd like to call it. During the investigation and the research, it did come up that the BMC really does not have any sort of code section to address hobby beekeeping. We do have a small code section in our agriculture section of the zoning, or the zoning code, that basically goes into, you have to have a lot, half an acre or larger, in order to do beekeeping for agricultural purposes. This beekeeper in question did not really fall into that. He was not doing beekeeping for honey purposes or anything along those lines, or agricultural purposes. He was more doing it because the bee population is diminishing, and he is trying to help with that. So I also went into other surrounding cities and counties just to kind of look up the code section to kind of see what everyone else did. And it became clear that everyone around us pretty much did have a code section in regards to hobby beekeeping in residential areas. The highlighted areas here, I'm not going to go over these specifically. You are able to access these on any of these sites. I did reference their code sections. But one of the questions that we are going to ask for guidance on is if we do want a minimum lot size for whether it's allowed to have bees. For the city of Kirkland, they do have a minimum lot size of 7,200 square feet in order to be able to do any sort of beekeeping. They then break down lot size by square feet and how many hives are available there. Kind of goes into a little bit more information. What I found on all of these, here's the city of Kenmore, is that all of them do require all of the beekeepers to register with the Department of Agriculture, and I did get in contact with them. I did receive a list of all of the registered beekeepers. I do believe the number was there are 5 or 6 that are registered with the Department of Agriculture that are actually in the Bothell city limits that would fall under our jurisdiction. So that was a little bit more than I had anticipated. And I do know that there are a lot more in the surrounding Snohomish and King County areas. In Kenmore, they do have a limited, this is more for acreage, so it kind of isn't a lot size thing. City of Redmond, they also have some regulations when it comes to lot size in zoned areas. So no more than 2 hives can be in R1, 2, and 3. And it goes on into that with Redmond. And then City of Seattle also has no more than 4 hives, each with 1 swarm allowed on a 10,000 square foot lot. Again, I don't want to get into that too much. You guys are more than welcome. I can provide this for you if you'd like to read over these code section a little bit more. Here, like I said, I can provide that for you. But what our considerations are here is that we're just wondering if we should have a minimum lot size to be able to allow residential hobby beekeeping. And are there any other issues that should be considered when we're drafting these regulations? In conclusion, as I said, I do see this becoming possibly a little bit more popular in the Bothell area. Due to the decrease in the bee population, due to climate change, increase in pesticides, and a range of other factors that go into that. Basically, why we're wanting to do this is to make it a little bit more clear for myself in my job position as to what I can enforce and what I can do, and make it a little bit more clear for the public as well, just so that we have these regulations, so that we have some more standards that we can follow, and it would make it a lot easier for me when it comes to something along these lines. Right now, I don't have too much to enforce because we don't have anything in the code for me to enforce specifically. So, especially if you're not doing it for agricultural purposes. So, like I said in the beginning, we're not asking for any action, just some direction, and we can bring this, to the April 20th meeting as well. So, but that's all I have for you guys, short and sweet. And let me unshare my screen.
Short and sweet like honey.
Yep, just like honey. So
just to add a couple of things to Christine's information there. One is the converse of what she was saying in terms of what she's able to enforce is if there is a complaint and she can go out and investigate, and if they're complying with everything, then there is no enforcement action necessary, because that was the other conundrum that we faced. There was nothing we could do in either direction, which was very frustrating for everybody involved, frankly. The other thing that I would mention is one of the things that we've looked at, rather than going zone by zone or just limiting to a lot size, is limiting it to any single family use, regardless of what zone they're in. So that would be another approach, I think, that we've also considered. I believe, Christine, I think that was one of the options that we had looked at.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Robson first, then Commissioner Westerbeck.
Thank you. This is Claire Robson. My question, I don't know a lot about beekeeping, but I was wondering, it would seem to make more sense to me that rather restricting it to the lot size allowed, the distance the hive is from neighbors, because it doesn't seem to make sense like from their living space or their yard. If you have, half an acre, but you put your hives right on the border of your land, it seems like, well, the bees will just go over there regardless of the size of lot. So do bees know about that kind of thing? How does that work?
So I believe it is attached to the memo that was sent to you all. There are going to be setback regulations. So you can't just put your hives on your back property line so that it's just going to be closest to your neighbor. That's not something that we want to do either. We don't want to create a nuisance for people in their yards. We obviously want them to be able to utilize their backyards, and we don't want that to happen. So there are regulations in the code itself that is going to address setback regulations and things along those lines. I believe that that's all you asked, but if you could remind me. I am pregnant, so I do have pregnancy brain, so please ignore me. I try my best to remember everything that you're saying. So, but we do have regulations on setbacks and things along those lines. So that's not going to be, I don't believe that should be an issue.
Thank you, Commissioner Westerbeck, then Commissioner Dodd and Commissioner Anders.
Commissioner Robson said exactly the question I wanted to, or say what I wanted to say. I don't think minimum lot size is applicable here. It doesn't seem like a fair standard, but the distance from lot lines seems really logical to me, because if I had a 4,000 or 5,000 square foot lot, which we have those, if you had the same distances, like she said, if you were off the property line 25 feet, like we saw in the packet that you listed, why shouldn't you be able to do that? So seems fair. And then the city of Seattle one was more generic. Anything under 10,000 square feet, you could have one hive, I think it said, or two hives or something like that. So those kinds of standards that don't put barriers, especially given what we talked about the last couple hours, where we're going to probably see smaller properties and maybe more people interested. Let's allow them to do it as long as they can meet codes that are flexible. So that seems logical to me.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Dodd.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for your presentation, Christine. Really helpful. I enjoyed the Sims 3 beehive thing. So I agree with Commissioner Westerbeck, who totally stole my thunder. I think rather than a minimum lot size or what kind of zones, I think just if you can meet the setback requirements, have your bees. So I like it. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Anders.
This is Tony Anders. This is just a general information question. Do bees make noise? I mean, will I hear them in addition to seeing them, or what do they do? Just fly around their hives? I don't know.
I'm not a bee specialist either myself, so I'm not completely knowledgeable. I did learn a lot from that beekeeper. I do believe that there are times when there is what's called swarming, but they tend to stay with their hives because they have a queen, and so they want to come back. They have their workers is basically, that's why we call people busy bees, or worker bees, because that's what they're there for, is they're there to go out, find pollen, things along those lines, and then bring it back to the queen. You do get occasional, few that lose their way, and then you can go get that bee and bring it back to the hive. I don't believe that they make a ton of noise, but I do know that swarming season can probably be a little off-putting for people at that time, but it doesn't last a long time. That's not what they do all the time.
Okay.
To my knowledge, so.
Commissioner Curd.
Thanks. This is Karsten, and thanks, Christine, for your presentation. I'm learning a lot, and hopefully we don't get into zoning for bees, but I'm looking at it a different way than Commissioners Westerbeck and Dodd. Instead of just looking at sort of the form-based code, which would be setbacks and how it looks like on the property, I'm wondering more about how we can make your job easier from an enforcement standpoint, because let's say you get a complaint from a neighbor and they say, oh yeah, they set their hive 25 feet, within 25 feet of the property corner, blah, blah, blah. You go out there and measure it and it's like 22 feet. Is that really enforceable? How do we make your job more cut and dried?
So I feel like, and Mike can help me with this a little bit, I do have a little bit of leeway, I feel like, when making decisions. I do also go to legal a lot to ask them, on a legal basis, if I do make this call, let's say it's off by a foot or two, are we okay doing that as the city, or what kind of ramifications are we going to have if we do something along these lines? I do get a lot of pushback with certain things, but moving a beehive, I don't feel like would be too difficult to do. I mean, if you obviously have a structure that's that's not following setbacks, that's a little bit more difficult to then, physically move. So a beehive, I don't foresee getting too much pushback on that, just because these are, they're not super large. So that should be, if you are off and not following the setbacks, when you do these things, you have to follow the rules and regulations. So I don't foresee that personally being an issue or if needing to do that.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Yeah, I think just the framing that that they were hitting it from, which is that we don't want to limit who necessarily can have bees in the city. That's like an equity argument, and I totally am on the same page there. But just making your job easier if it's like above a quarter acre or below a quarter acre, that would also just seems like it'd be really easy. So thanks for the information.
And I think having the standards is really intended to make her job easier, because then there is something that's more defined that can then be used to measure. So a question back to the commission. So what I'm hearing is it's more about the distance, the separation, not so much about whether it's single family or multifamily on the site. So let's say, given the previous discussion, if you have a duplex on a single family lot, they want to put 2 hives in the backyard and they can meet the distance requirements. Sounds like the commission would be okay with that. Generally speaking, I'm not speaking for each of you individually, just as a group consensus. Is that a fair statement?
I see consensus nodding. I don't see anyone scowling or.
I'm a little confused by that. Do they then have to keep the hive within a certain distance from their non-duplex neighbor, or from the duplex neighbor also? That could be, the hive would be right on their back door.
That's the challenge. You've hit the point exactly, Commissioner Anders. That's why I asked the question, because it's easy for us to say, yeah, we don't care if it's single family or duplex or whatever, as long as you can be 25 feet from your property line. But then you do have those other neighbors that could also file a complaint. So that's why I asked the question. So I think we'll look at that a little more closely and see if there's a way to do that in a fairly simple and straightforward way. One of the reasons that we talked about just doing it for single family was for that very reason, because then you're only dealing with the adjacent property owners, and it's a very clear cut. You can do it here, you can't do it there. So we'll take a little closer look at that and see, because we do want to provide some more flexibility, but we may not be able to get there with this, because we're also trying not to overcomplicate or spend a lot of extra time on this particular code amendment either.
Commissioner Dodd first, then Commissioner Westerbeck.
Thanks. I just want to clarify. I guess in my mind, so having owned a condo, I didn't have any outdoor space. There was a small bit of space behind my back porch, and it was not for my use. It was shared space, right? I've had friends with townhouses. They've had small yards. They've had no yards. And your HOA is always very clear about what you're allowed to do with that space. In terms of a duplex with different ownership, I've only seen them in Canada on HGTV, right? But I've seen a lot. And, sometimes they have little postage stamp yards. Sometimes they have quite big yards. So I guess in my mind, allowing it based on setbacks accounts for 2 things. It makes sure that we don't miss people who have just yards we're not thinking of right now in this session, that may be in a townhouse or half of a duplex, but they just happen to have a big yard too, or a big enough yard. And then the other thing is it assumes to me that whatever structure is in place around that non-single family housing, whether it's an HOA, whether it's a legal agreement with the property, addresses, whose outdoor space is whose, so that the neighbors know, okay, Steve's yard is 15 feet from this side of my yard. I'm going to, keep my bees over here, or, hey, I don't have enough room for bees. So that's kind of my thinking there, just to flesh that out.
Other commissioners? So I think we like bees and we'd like it to be simple. If you can figure that out. Does that give you enough to get started on this, or hopefully move along on it?
I think so. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, thank you for bringing this to us. It was interesting. We appreciate hearing different things and think about how to address them.
It's interesting for me as well. Like I said, haven't had too many of these, so this is a little unique, but I do think it's something that we do need to put into the code. So
Yes, I bet you see a bit of variety of issues that come up.
I sure do.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Robson.
Was there somebody who wanted to make a public comment?
Yes,
That's right.
thank you.
There was.
Thank you. Yes. Just remember that as well. Thank you. So that was
MC.
Mark. And could you repeat your last name for me, Mark? Mark,
he's muted.
Yeah, can you unmute?
There we go.
Yes. Can you repeat your last name for me, Mark?
Yeah, it's Calkins, and I did type in my email address. So if you want to contact me, you're welcome to email away.
Unfortunately, I don't get that information. That goes into Zoom.
Okay. Well, I'd called Christine earlier this week, and she returned my message. Thank you for that, Christine. So she's got my contact info as well.
Thank you.
I just heard about this, so I don't know too much about what the proposed language is. I still need to dig that up. Christine gave me a hint, but I haven't gotten there yet. So I'll give you a couple answers to some of the questions that I heard. Do bees make noise? Yeah, they can make noise, and Christine was absolutely right that a swarm can be both beautiful and intimidating because the bees are quite loud, but they don't persist for very long. They persist for maybe 60 to 90 minutes, and then the bees will find a place to roost, and that's where they'll spend the night. And the next day, they're generally pretty quiet as they find their new home. So that's the noise part of it. Day to day, if you look at a hive, unless you're within 20, maybe 30 feet of it, even on a really busy, hot day, you're not going to hear them until you get within that 20 to 30 foot range. As far as bees, obviously bees are animals. They're not going to know boundaries or anything like that. And I heard somebody ask, do bees know about zoning and all that? Well, I've been asking my bees all sorts of silly questions over the years. I have not had an answer yet. And I haven't asked them about the zoning yet, but if you want, I will, but I don't think they're going to answer me. Anyway, I'm looking forward to working with Christine a little bit to try to figure out what the details are, because the details are the important part. And I heard that offset is important. I would agree that offsets are important, but as an alternative to offsets, if you have a solid wall, the bees typically will fly over the wall and continue their trajectory up. They do not pour over the wall like a wave. Now, a few of them might go to the neighbor's yard and, go do their pollination thing of the flowers and stuff, but that's going to be an exception rather than the rule. You're not going to see thousands of bees pour over your fence into your neighbor's yard. That would be very unusual, if not never type of occurrence. Don't want to use the word never though. But anyway, that's about all I had, unless there's somebody that wants to ask a question of a beekeeper. I'm happy to try to answer them.
Commissioner Robson, your hand is up. Do you have a question? No? Okay. Commissioner Westerbeck, your hand, there you go.
So it sounds like I really appreciate you clarifying that, because there was in the packet, you could have 25 feet or you could have the wall that you mentioned. So it sounds like we'd want to incorporate that. It sounds like it's really a critical piece, because if someone says, well, I can't do the 25 feet, but I can do a wall and it's as effective, if not more so, then that's probably important for us to understand. So I appreciate you clarifying that. This is very interesting to me. I had no idea there was so much to it, but Makes perfect sense. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
We've all learned a lot about bees through this process, I will say. So thank you, Mark, for that information. And if you do get a chance to ask your bees about the zoning, we'd appreciate any feedback they can provide.
I can get back to you on that.
Thank you.
All right, commissioners, any other questions or comments on bees? All right, well, thank you, Christine, for bringing this to us. We've enjoyed the little interlude here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And we'll look forward to seeing the amendments as they come forward. All right, I think that ends the study. Oh, Commissioner Curd.
I'm wondering if you would like to extend the meeting.
My recollection is we no longer have to do that. Is that correct, Director Cotterman?
That is correct.
Yay. Okay.
Yeah, I looked at my computer and saw that, but thanks for keeping an eye on it. We will try to move through and not keep people up all night, though. So with that, we do end the study session portion of the meeting. That brings us to unfinished business. Director Cotterman, I believe you have something to discuss with us.
I had just added some information to the packet. I really didn't need to go over it this evening, excuse me, especially given the hour. If the commission has any questions, we can go over it more at the next meeting, but we have planned out tentatively at least agenda topics for the rest of this quarter as well as the next quarter. And we'll continue to work forward through the rest of the year and keep you apprised of that. I will say, and I'm kind of getting into the next topic there, which is the staff announcements, but there will be potentially some meetings where we don't have much business or enough business. So we'll work with the chair on whether or not to hold those meetings coming up, and particularly in the, I think, mid part of the next quarter. So we'll talk some more about that if that need arises. The other thing I wanted to mention in terms of unfinished business, at the last meeting, there was discussion on the part of the commission about the interview process for board and commission members. And I believe I sent out an email to all of you after I did some checking on that and found out that that is subject to the Open Public Meetings Act. That's why, for those of you who interviewed prior to COVID, where it was an in-person and there was nobody there, that's just because no one showed up, but they were certainly allowed to be there. And so that's why the virtual setup allowed for people to be viewing those interviews. So I have that shared that information also with the chair, and we talked about it, and we'll convey to the city clerk that information at least be provided to applicants in the future so that they know that that's a possibility, but there's nothing else that can be done. So I think the chair and I agreed it probably wasn't worth taking that to the city council.
Yes, that's correct.
So I just wanted to close the loop on that one.
Okay.
That's all I had under unfinished business, unless there are any questions about either of those items.
Looking across, I do not see any commissioners expressing an interest. All right, then, reports from staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a few quick items I'll run through. So City Hall did open up to the public again yesterday for the first time in over 2 years. We're very excited about that. The hours, as I've mentioned before, were Tuesday through Thursday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. We're kind of tracking the traffic to see if those hours work, if we need to adjust things at some point. I think we had a grand total of 4 or 5 people actually come into City Hall yesterday, one of those being Commissioner Westerbeck. I think he increased our percentage there significantly, so appreciated him coming in and keeping us busy. We have started advertising for the deputy director position for the department. This is a reclassification of our development services manager position. Jeff Smith, whom I believe most of you have met, is retiring in a few months. So I've gotten permission to reclassify that as a deputy director position, which not only helps in terms of the organization of the department, but also gives us some additional support for the comprehensive plan update work that's going to be done. So that's being advertised. We hope to start interviews in early April on that. Speaking of interviews, the city manager interviews, the semifinalist interviews are this week. The city council has special meetings tomorrow and Saturday. They will be narrowing down to, we don't know how many, but to a group of finalists. Last time it was 4, I believe. Started out to be 4, ended up being 3, 1 dropped out. So presumably somewhere in that range, 3 to 5 for the finalists. And the finalist interviews will be on April 5th, sorry. But this Saturday, they will be announcing who those finalists are. So that will be some information that is available to the public. Last night at City Council, we brought them the King County countywide planning policies. Nathan Lamb did a presentation on that, and it was an opportunity for the council to take an affirmative action to ratify those. So the way the King County process works is the Growth Management Planning Council, which is made up of elected officials from King County and other jurisdictions in the county from cities, make a recommendation on the countywide planning policies to the county council. The county council then acts on that on behalf of the unincorporated area. Then it goes out to all the cities to ratify. And it has to be ratified by 30% of the cities, representing 70% of the population. I didn't come up with these formulas. This has been around for a while. This is how it all was worked out for those to become effective. And the reason that's important is because all of the cities in the county and the county itself, when we do our comprehensive plans, we need to be consistent with those countywide policies. So that's why we pay attention to that. And we give the council an opportunity to weigh in. Not allowed to change anything at that point, but they can either vote for it or against it. If there's no vote, they're deemed to have approved it. So different process in Snohomish County. And as Nathan said last night, we're blessed with having to be consistent with both sets of countywide policies. So they did take action last night to ratify those. Today we had our kickoff meeting with the consultants with Urban 3, just to let you know, nothing else to report at this point other than we're off and running, and it'll be at least a couple of months, probably 3 or 4 before we actually start to have information that will be in a form for us to start sharing with the city council and planning commission. We'll see what works as far as when we share with other than the city council at that point. We do have 2 new members for boards and commissions for our department staffs. One being Commissioner Anders, of course, for the Planning Commission. Again, welcome. Very happy to have you join our group. And the others for the Landmark Preservation Board. That's also an unfilled position, so that person will be taking that seat starting next week if they're available. So we will do an orientation session. We'll work with Commissioner Anders as well as the new Landmark Board member to schedule that. Tentatively, we're looking at what we typically do is before the first meeting in April, we meet a little bit early and go through about an hour time of just to kind of give background orientation information about planning, what we're required to do, the Growth Management Act, operational items for the commission, that sort of thing. So we'll let the whole commission know. If any of you would like a refresher course, you're welcome to join us for that. Obviously, we'll work with Commissioner Anders and the other new board member to make sure that we can come up with a time that works for you as well, Commissioner. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me, and I'm happy to help get you up to speed as much as we can. And I believe that's all I had this evening, Mr. Chair, unless there are any questions.
Not seeing any commissioners with questions. So with that, I guess we'll move to reports from members. Anything to report to the group? Commissioner Curd.
I got an email from Director Cotterman today, but I just wanted to point everyone to their inboxes. On the 23rd, there is the Bothell Way widening second public meeting. And the first one was really enlightening to visit and ask questions that were answered in the live chat, which is great. And so that's, I think, another virtual meeting that's coming up. So the information's in your inbox and is on the city website.
And we do not have public meeting concerns about that, correct?
For the webinars, what we've decided is it's not necessary.
Okay, just to confirm that.
Yeah. We trust you all to behave yourselves.
Commissioner Westerbeck, then Commissioner Dodd.
Sure. I just realized I guess I had something to share. Next week, I'm going to go to Oklahoma City, exciting Oklahoma City, for the Congress for New Urbanism the 30th Congress, I guess they would call it. And they haven't had an in-person one since pre-pandemic. So anyway, when it was here in Seattle in 2017, Bothell had, I think, 2 different tours. I remember I went on one with Dave Boyd, Senior Planner Boyd, when he showed everyone everything going on in Bothell. So anyway, that's going to be fun. I'm really excited about it. And I probably have a few things to share when I get back. So definitely, bunch of planning nerds all in one place. So looking forward to it, and I'll tell you what I learned.
Thank you. We'll look forward to hearing from you. Commissioner Dodd.
Mine is not nearly as exciting as Commissioner Westerbeck's, but I was going to say, to tag on to what Commissioner Curd reminded us about, if you can't make the meetings and you have questions, which was my situation for the first meeting, I called the project manager in the emails, and he answered his phone right away. We didn't even have to play phone tag. I asked a lot of questions, and he totally went into it with me. So just keep in mind, you can also just reach out, which is really helpful. So that's all.
Great. Thank you for sharing that with us. Other member reports, anything to share? All right. Items to report to council. I don't think anything came up this time. No. All right. Thank you. Then I'd like to again welcome Commissioner Andrews to the group. We're pleased to have you with us. Look forward to your participation going forward. Don't hesitate to jump in. We welcome all comments. So thanks for being here. And I guess there being no further business, is there a motion to adjourn? Commissioner Dodd.
Move to adjourn the meeting.
Is there a second?
I will second that go ahead.
Nope,
Tony, you do it. Get in there.
Fred.
I second the motion to adjourn.
All right, it's been moved by Commissioner Dodd and seconded by Commissioner Andrews to adjourn the meeting. Seeing no discussion, we will adjourn the March 16th meeting of the Bothell Planning Commission at 9:12. Thank you all for your participation, and
Thank you.
I'm assuming that was unanimous consent, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, I looked across the faces and saw no objections.
Good to see everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Everyone. Good night.
See you all. That's the end of our first quarter.
That's right.
And welcome, Tony.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Bye-bye.